Hello, internet friends. I figured it was about time. We're about 40 videos in, maybe more, maybe less. We can do a quick little review video of what we've been working on, as well as sort of an intro video to people who might be coming and joining a little bit late and aren't ready to necessarily watch all the content. So we've been building an open mic app. Basically, it's a very typical social media app, hence why I picked this, something that I think a lot of people can pull value from. But it's specifically meant, in my use case, it is meant to aggregate and have like a community for people that go to open mic events. So that's like people that play guitar and sing. It could be people that do poetry. There's comedy open mics, and sometimes there's like open mics, I guess we would call it, which are like you can kind of do whatever you want. I'm going to do a quick review. I want to speak to a few things first. Firstly, this has been a really fun and fun project. It's been something I wanted to make for a while, and I've also, kind of wanted to do this interesting experiment on YouTube of actually building a full app from scratch. Everything, nothing hidden. We're going right from basically this planning document, and if you watch the first video, you'll see me go into this a lot more. We're going right from this all the way to the App Store. That is the plan, and we're getting close. We're not, I would say we're at least let's say we're 90% there. Now, fun fact, usually the last 10% of anything is 90% of the work. So we'll see how long it still takes. Just keep that in mind when you're building things. All that polish, all those little things, when users start actually getting their hands on it, you realize, oh, I didn't, think about this properly, so on and so forth. So basically our app as a sort of review, we obviously have auth, being able to log in and create accounts. Currently it's just email and password based, but we are going to add, at least Google, and Apple as well, because we will need Apple, at least on iOS devices, to follow the rules that they have. Basically, Apple's kind of like, you don't have to have Apple sign in with Apple, but you do if you use another sign-in service, which is, I think a fair rule. So we have like the auth section, which is kind of connected to the user, kind of not. This is like the actual user account, which, is kind of like partly their public profile, essentially. There is a guest mode of our app, so we are allowing people to come to this without signing up, which is, I think an important thing in any app, especially in today's world where there's so many apps. And because we are building this not just for iOS and Android, but also for web, we definitely want people to be able to land on, a particular page and be able to read and interact in the lightest sort of way, and then make an account if they actually want to, comment or create an event or whatever. Then when you get actually into the app itself, which we kind of have right here, you have your feed, you have your explore, you have create, you have events, and you have profile. So feed is kind of like the social part of the app. A little bit social stuff sprinkled kind of all throughout. Explore is when you're looking for a particular what we call venue. So that's like a location that does an open mic, usually on a weekly basis. Create is for you to create a new event, or even create a venue, or create a post in the social thing. So that's like, we don't have that button yet, but it's going to be like, that big middle button like every app has to, do things. We kind of have it. We have like a floating action button in various places, but the idea is we're going to have one that allows you to create multiple things. We'll see. Then we have events. So say you're not so much caring about the location itself, but you just want to see what's happening on Thursday. This is what we can do to help our users find that. And then we have our profile, which is, your own profile, ability to edit your profile, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like the scope of this thing. Again, if you're just seeing this for the first time, go back to the first video if you kind of want to have a better idea of what we're trying to do. My plans have not changed, although new ideas have come up, and some will do, some will push for after the MVP, the minimum viable product. A lot of this is staying true. I sort of had this vision. Cool. So how are we building this? Well, we're using Flutter. Which if you're, not new to my channel at all, you wouldn't be surprised. I love Flutter, and a lot of my content is based around Flutter. But we're also using something called Serverpod on the backend, which is a Dart-based backend. However, I like to kind of frame it as a full stack framework, because there's a lot of aspects of Serverpod that aren't even necessarily the backend. It's kind of how it ties into the front end. Serverpod's really cool because you can kind of build your backend, configure your backend models and endpoints and stuff. And there's sort of this intermediate app called the client, and it gets auto-generated based off of your backend code. And the Flutter app actually interacts with the client, which then interacts with the service. So what's kind of cool is, although you're still building APIs and models and stuff, you're not making them in two places. You're doing it once, and it really does just feel like a full stack application. I've been doing a lot of these like decoupled apps for a long time. It's kind of the only option really with, especially with like native apps. You can't really do like a full stack sort of thing. But actually, pretty recently, I built a Django project that is actually just going back to the basics of full stack Django without like an API, and it felt really nice because it just seems like a lot less work when you're not thinking about a client side and a server side as two sort of enormous projects, as well as like that API that connects it. And I feel like Serverpod kind of hits that beautiful spot where it's like you need to have this decoupled. Your app is not gonna can't run the back end on like it just doesn't make sense unless you're just doing a mobile website. You have to have them decoupled. They have to be two separate applications, the back end and the front end. But it really doesn't feel like that in Serverpod. And if you haven't checked it out, check it out. I have a lot of content on Serverpod. I really like it. This series being the most enormous amount of Serverpod content I've made, but I've done some other series in the past that maybe are a little easier to take in. So yeah, just to do a quick look, essentially I have two different, although they're in the same Git repo, there's kind of like the backend code and the front end code. And yeah, what's cool about Serverpod is, and I'll zoom this just a bit here, is you essentially make your models, you actually just configure them as like a YAML file. So let's pick one pretty basic. Let's do post, because that's actually what we're going to be working on today, or probably in the next video, because I'm just doing this right now. We're not going to do any work in this video, but in the next video we'll be actually continuing on this part. So you kind of configure it. You give it a model name, you give it a database table name, because Serverpod uses Postgres. It's great. And essentially we can create like relationships to other models. So we have our user model, our venue model, and our event model, and we can just create them like this. And we create a body on a post. So this is like what you would, if it's a tweet, it would be the text of that, and it's just a string. So we're using like Dart-based, sort of names for primitives. Same with we have an image URL. We're gonna have tags, and we're gonna have, a date time for when it was created. So we just kind of do that, and then you run like Serverpod generate, and it actually like creates. If you go into the generated code, it's actually creating. Have we generated this one yet? Yeah, post. So it's actually creating, like, look at all this code. This is a decent amount of code. It's all the stuff like, if you use something like freeze, it's something similar to that. It's all the code kind of for that. It's for like serialization, deserialization, copy widths, all the database related stuff, so on and so forth. So that's cool. We didn't have to make any of that. We just wrote, 12, not even 12 lines, because there's, let's say 10 lines of configuration. Cool, so we have that, and then we can also make endpoints. So let's look at our endpoints here, and we did make the post endpoint, so we'll look at that as an example. You know what, this is a bad one because all we have is save so far. Let's look at the venue endpoint. So me getting a list of venues, it's pretty basic. I create this endpoint, I call it list, and basically allow it to pass in a limit, how many results do I want, and then what page, because we want to use pagination, we want like kind of like an infinite scroll kind of thing. And then we just go and Serverpod has its own ORM built in, so we basically just await using the venues. A venue has like a static property called DB, and then we can find. So that's just being able to find, and we basically are passing in that limit. We're doing this little pagination by passing in an offset, and then we're just telling it to include certain things. So we've kind of made some things. Hey, anytime we get a venue, we also want to include the owner's like serialized data in it as well. So that's kind of like how it can deal with joins, if you're familiar with databases. And then we just return what we call a venue list. And this is just a, if we look at it, this is also a, oops, let's find the right one, venue list.spy. So this is also a model that we're making just with YAML. The only difference is we don't actually have a database or a table here like we did over somewhere here. So this is actually just a model, a class that we can work with, but doesn't actually persist in the database. And there's no need for this to persist in the database. This is essentially a wrapper for like a list result that will tell the client, hey, is there another page, and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like the pattern. You make the model, you make the endpoints, you run generators. It's all good. It creates all the stuff, generates all the code on the back end. It generates this code in this what's called the client. And on the Flutter side, it's as simple as let's look at maybe the venue list, since we were just looking at that. Let's make this a bit bigger. Venue, I'll look at we'll start at the service, I guess. So on the client side, we have a service, venue service, and we pass in this client. This is actually Serverpod's client. This is the way you talk through the API. Although it's ultimately using kind of like JSON REST-based sort of stuff. You don't think of it that way. You just actually go await client.venue. That's the name of the endpoint like collection. So all these are in here, list, search, whatever. And then we pass those things through and get that data. So it's really easy to work with Serverpod. Like all this got auto-generated. We didn't have to make this stuff. Technically, if we didn't want to be really clean, we wouldn't even have to have this service. We could just work in our UI right with this. But we're doing this with what I think I've been referring to the stream is semi-clean architecture. Although I am a fan of clean architecture, I do think it's overkill for like a solo project. And I think it kind of can get in the way. It's really good when you're like, oh, I might want to change my backend at some point, or I'm working with a team and I want to have everyone have their own roles. But I think that this is we've kind of gone with this nice blend where it's still clean, it's nice, but it's not going like full out and having like repositories and data sources and all this sort of stuff. We are using something called FP Dart, functional programming for Dart, and allows us on our results, on any of our, when we're dealing with things that could fail, especially like network requests, because ultimately, even though it doesn't feel like it, this is a network request, we can return two different things. So we're using that pattern, which is nice. Basically, left meaning an error. So when something goes wrong, we actually return that, and we can handle it in our, in our caller. Right meaning something went right. So now we never have to deal with like null sort of stuff because we're actually throwing exceptions ultimately at the end of the day. So yeah, the pattern or the way we sort of have our code base lined up is we have a feature-based thing. So we have sort of the same thing as in the backend. We have our, for every model basically, like venue, post, what else, event, auth, all that kind of stuff. We have a folder, and within each we have components, which is your UI elements, reusable sort of things. We have the models themselves. However, we don't actually have to generate the Dart models for like our models because that happens with Serverpod automatically, which is kind of why I was saying earlier, like it feels, it's not just a backend, it is a full stack thing because I'm actually able to interface like with this, like look, venue list, this was all generated code by, by Serverpod itself, and it's happening in my front end code base essentially. Technically it's happening in the client, which is like a third sort of project that you never really have to touch. But at the end of the day, like it's pretty cool. And the value of it is that you're getting this full, end to end, serialization and endpoints and whatnot. So we have our models folder. We have providers. We are using Riverpod for this, and I love Riverpod, and I've used a lot of things, so I'm allowed to say that I like it the most. And yeah, so we have things like for lists, we're basically able to, fetch our data by, working with that service provider that I was just showing you, get the result, and this is where the the either thing comes in. So we actually, because because our result can be either a string or venue list, we actually fold on it. The first one is there's an error, and this is where you could, we haven't got really too, I should probably be like at least saying something error, print error, cool. And otherwise, the second thing is like when something went correct, in which case we know this is a venue list, and we can kind of, do things to it. So yeah, we have stuff like that. We're using, so this is just a, what is this? This is just a notifier provider, or some state notifier. But we're also on our detail providers. This is like a really nice pattern. We basically go, we have this Riverpod annotation here, so we can go venue detail, and we can call this anywhere in our UI, wherever we're using like a consumer. And what we do is we go and we get the venue service provider and we retrieve based on that ID. This is a family, meaning this will actually be, although it's like a singleton, it'll be cloned and disposed of as needed for each unique ID. So an int of ID 1, would have this in memory and so on and so forth. So family-based sort of stuff. And then, yeah, we just return the result by folding. If there was an error, we print out the error, but if not, we return this. So that's why this is a future of a venue. Technically, though, the venue can be null because if something goes wrong. So we have providers, we have screens. Cool. So I like to keep the screens as basic as possible. So like the root screen, for instance, although there's a couple things in here, it's really just like references to sort of like the main container stuff, like this screen. If we were to, let's actually look at it, our venue would be the Explorer screen. So it's basically like we have the, obviously the app bar, we have the floating action button, and then we have this default tab controller for the two different modes because we allow, looking on a map or looking in a list view. But then the actual components themselves are, pretty compartmentalized, and we don't want to have this kind of logic on our screens. Keep the screens as like basic as possible, and then the components themselves do their thing. So yeah, that's kind of that. And then yeah, services we already looked at, and then we have routes for each one. We kind of keep the routes, at least for our primary, different tabs. They each have these sort of namespace things like the venue routes, and there's one for feed and all that kind of stuff. And we're using Go Router. So we have a router, app router, I think it's called. And this is just all of our routes, and it actually just really points to these different branches essentially, which is what I was just showing you. So we could of course have this all in one file, but I kind of just like keeping things really like separated based on their feature. So instead of including all that stuff, we just include venue routes. Cool, done, and we get everything. Container, cool. Yeah, we have localization already set up, which is cool. Now, I'm not necessarily planning on releasing this app with multiple languages, but I wanted to, tutorial-wise, kind of show how to do it on a big project. We have theming happening, so I don't even know if we actually made. Yeah, we must have. So we can change the theme to light mode and dark mode and everything. Yeah, we have a map. You saw that real quick. So this is using, I think, like Flutter maps, and we can see all the things nearby, and we can see what events would be there. We have things like bookmarking and liking and stuff. Of course, we have the ability to edit and create. There's a lot going on. I'm not going to go into any more than that. Yeah, just kind of wanted to do this, semi-quick. What are we at? 20 minutes, roughly. No, sorry, 16 minutes. Oh, that's nice. Short-ish video, just kind of getting everyone up to speed on this, and hopefully you can come join. I think what's been really cool about this project is we have quite a few people that have joined my YouTube membership, because one of the perks I'm giving right now is you get access, basically live access to the source code on GitHub. It's currently a private repo. I do intend on making it public, sometime after this series, but I wanted to reserve something for my paying members. Yeah, if you're interested, come join. We have a Discord. It's really fun. And yeah, what I was kind of saying is like there's quite a few people, maybe like a half dozen people that I know of, at least in our membership, that have specifically actually built and some I think are ready to launch like an app. And they've been working with this flow with using some of the code that I've been writing from that GitHub. And it's kind of cool because my intention was like I want to build something that's pretty like has a lot of shared things between that many apps need, because I've built so many apps. I know like apps all have a lot of the same needs, and some obviously have certain specific differences. But this one I feel is like pretty broad and covers most of the bases. And yeah, people have kind of taken it and they're putting out their own apps now and stuff. So yeah, if you're interested in that too, we're covering everything here. Yeah, it's a bit to walk through. Watch it at 1.5%, or sorry, 150, 125%. I don't know. Watch it faster if it's too long for you. I'd love to hear what you think of this series. So yeah, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching, and we're gonna get into actually doing some more work in the next video because there's still lots to do. I want to get the feed going soon. Right now we have just it's blank. See you then, and we'll see how far along we get. Thanks for hanging out.